The stagecoach rumbled into San Bernardino, California on a scorching afternoon in July of 1877, carrying a young woman whose hands trembled so violently she had to grip her carpetbag with both arms to keep from dropping it. Clara Simmons pressed herself against the worn leather seat, her heart hammering as the wheels jolted over another rut in the dusty road, and she wondered for the 1,000th time if answering that advertisement had been the worst mistake of her life. She had memorized every word of the letter from Vincent Hawthorne, the rancher seeking a wife to help run his homestead 30 miles outside of town. His words had been simple, honest, promising nothing more than hard work, a roof over her head, and respectful companionship. After 3 years of living with her cruel uncle in Philadelphia following her parents' death, even those modest promises had seemed like a dream. But now, as the stage rolled past buildings with peeling paint and men with guns strapped to their hips, Clara felt the familiar terror rising in her chest like floodwater. The driver called out, and the horses slowed to a stop outside the San Bernardino Hotel. Clara's breathing came in short, rapid gasps. Through the dusty window, she could see perhaps 24 people moving about the street, and the sight of so many strangers made her stomach clench. A shadow fell across the stage door, and she jerked back with a small cry, clutching her bag to her chest. "Miss Simmons!" The voice was deep but gentle, and when Clara dared to look up, she saw a tall man with sun-weathered skin and kind brown eyes peering in at her. He removed his worn hat, revealing dark hair that needed a trim. "I'm Vincent Hawthorne. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." Clara tried to speak, but her throat had closed up entirely. She managed a tiny nod, her entire body rigid with fear. Vincent's brow furrowed with concern, and he opened the stage door slowly, as though approaching a frightened animal. "Take your time," he said softly. "There's no rush at all." But there was a rush, because the driver was already hauling down her trunk from the top of the coach, and other passengers were gathering their belongings, and Clara knew she couldn't just sit frozen in the stage forever. She forced her legs to move, stepping down onto the wooden platform on wobbly knees. The moment her feet touched solid ground, a gust of wind caught her bonnet, and she flinched so hard she nearly fell. Vincent reached out to steady her, then immediately withdrew his hand when she recoiled. His expression shifted from concern to something deeper, a kind of understanding that surprised her. "The hotel has a private parlor," he said quietly. "Would you like to go there to rest before we talk?" "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, forcing the words past the constriction in her throat. "I'm not usually this." She trailed off because that was a lie. She was always like this, had been for as long as she could remember. Her uncle had called her pathetic, weak, useless. Her aunt had simply pretended she didn't exist. And now this stranger who had agreed to marry her was seeing just how damaged she truly was. "You've traveled a long way," Vincent said, his voice still gentle. "And this place is new to you. That would make anyone nervous." He picked up her trunk as though it weighed nothing and gestured toward the hotel. "Come on. I'll buy you some supper and we can get acquainted." The hotel dining room was mercifully quiet at this hour, with only a few patrons scattered among the tables. Vincent chose a corner spot that put Clara's back to the wall, and she was grateful for it even as she wondered if he'd done it deliberately. A waitress brought water and menus, and Clara tried not to notice how the woman's skirts rustled, how her footsteps echoed on the floorboards, how the front door kept opening and closing, each time bringing in a draft that made Clara's shoulders hunch. "I should tell you something," Vincent said after they'd ordered. He folded his hands on the table, and Clara noticed they were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard. "I was married before. Her name was Sarah, and she died 4 years ago giving birth to our daughter." "The baby died too." Clara's eyes widened, her own anxiety momentarily forgotten in the face of such profound loss. "I'm so sorry. I tell you because I want you to understand that I'm not looking for someone to replace her," Vincent continued. "I'm looking for a partner, someone to share the work and the life. The ranch is isolated and it's hard going sometimes, but it's honest work. I can promise you that I'll never raise my hand to you, never speak cruel words, and I'll do my best to make sure you have everything you need." He paused, studying her face. "But I need to know if you can handle the solitude. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and I sometimes go days without seeing another soul besides you." The thought should have terrified her, but instead Clara felt something unexpected, a tiny flicker of relief. Fewer people meant fewer things to fear, fewer chances for cruelty and judgment. "I think I could manage that," she said quietly. Vincent's expression softened. "I noticed you're scared of a lot of things. Is it just the travel, or is it something more?" Clara's hands twisted in her lap. She'd never had anyone ask her so directly, with such genuine curiosity rather than mockery. "I've always been this way," she admitted. "Loud noises frighten me, sudden movements, strangers, shadows sometimes when they catch me by surprise. My uncle said I was born wrong, that there's something defective in my mind." "Your uncle sounds like a fool," Vincent said bluntly, and Clara blinked in surprise. "I've seen men come back from the war with that kind of fear in their eyes. They'd jump at every sound, couldn't sleep, always watching for danger. Some people called them cowards, but I never thought so. Seemed to me they'd just seen too much, felt too much. Their minds were trying to protect them the only way they knew how. But I've never been to war," Clara whispered. "I've never seen anything so terrible. I have no reason to be this way." "Maybe not one big reason," Vincent said, "but 100 small ones can add up just the same. The way someone spoke to you or didn't speak to you, the way you were made to feel small and wrong. That kind of thing leaves marks too, even if you can't see them." He leaned back as the waitress brought their food, roasted chicken and potatoes and fresh bread that smelled like heaven. "Point is, I'm not judging you for it. And if you're willing to give this arrangement a try, I promise I'll do everything I can to make you feel safe." Clara's eyes burned with unexpected tears. She'd been preparing herself for disappointment, for Vincent to take one look at her and realize she was too broken to be any use to anyone. But here he was, speaking to her like she was a person who deserved kindness, and it was almost more than she could bear. "I'll try," she said. "I can't promise I'll be good at it, but I'll try." "That's all anyone can do," Vincent said, and he smiled at her for the first time, a warm expression that reached his eyes and made something in Clara's chest loosen just slightly. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Clara found herself stealing glances at the man across from her. He was probably in his early 30s, weathered by sun and wind but strong-looking, with a solid presence that seemed dependable. His hands were steady as he cut his chicken, and he ate without rushing, as though he had all the time in the world. It was so different from her uncle's house, where meals had been tense affairs full of criticism and complaint. "Tell me about the ranch," Clara said, surprising herself with the question. Vincent's face lit up. "It's nothing fancy, just a simple house and barn, about 200 acres. I run cattle mostly, about 50 head right now. There's a creek that runs through the property, good water year-round. I've got a vegetable garden that could use a woman's touch, and chickens that are more trouble than they are worth, but they lay decent eggs." He paused, taking a sip of water. "The house is small, 2 bedrooms. I've fixed up the second one for you, made sure it has a good lock on the door so you'll feel secure." The fact that he'd thought of that, had anticipated her need for a space that was truly hers, made Clara's throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," she managed. "We can get married tomorrow if you're willing," Vincent said. "The reverend here in town can do it quick and simple. Then we'll head out to the ranch. I've got supplies loaded in the wagon already." He hesitated. "But if you need more time to decide, I understand. I can get you a room here for a few days, give you a chance to think it over." Clara considered this. She could barely afford another night in a hotel and she had nowhere else to go. But more than that, something in her responded to Vincent's straightforward honesty, his lack of pretense. He wasn't promising her romance or passion, but he was promising safety and respect, and right now that seemed infinitely more valuable. "Tomorrow is fine," she said. They spent the night in separate rooms at the hotel, and Clara lay awake for hours, listening to every creak and groan of the building, her heart racing at each unfamiliar sound. But mixed in with the fear was something else, a tiny seed of hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she could finally breathe. The wedding the next morning was brief and practical. The reverend's wife served as witness, and Vincent produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. When he slipped it onto Clara's finger, his hands were warm and steady, and Clara tried not to think about how her own were shaking. They signed the marriage certificate. Vincent paid the reverend, and within 20 minutes Clara Simmons had become Clara Hawthorne, wife of a rancher she'd known for less than a day. The wagon ride to the ranch took almost 4 hours, following rough dirt roads that wound through scrubland dotted with Joshua trees and sage. The July heat was oppressive, and Clara was grateful for the bonnet that shaded her face. Vincent kept the horses at a steady pace, not rushing, and he pointed out landmarks as they went. "That peak there, the one that looks like a broken tooth, that's Eagle Rock," he said. "If you can see that, you can find your way to town. And that stand of cottonwoods about a mile south, that's where the Hendersons live. Good people. Mary Henderson is about your age, I'd guess. She'd probably welcome a visit sometime." Clara nodded, though the thought of visiting strangers made her stomach clench. She watched the landscape roll by, so different from Philadelphia's crowded streets and brick buildings. Here there was space, endless space, and sky so blue it hurt to look at. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, and jackrabbits darted through the brush. When they crested a low rise and Vincent said, "There it is," Clara leaned forward to see her new home. The house was small and weathered, built of wood that had been bleached gray by the sun, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. The barn behind it was larger, sturdy-looking, and there was a windmill near what must be the well. A few chickens scratched in the dirt of the yard, and she could see the dark shapes of cattle grazing in the distance. It was isolated and lonely and exactly what she needed. Vincent helped her down from the wagon, and this time Clara didn't flinch when he took her hand. He carried her trunk to the house and pushed open the door, gesturing for her to enter first. The interior was dim and cool, with simple furnishings, a table and chairs, a cookstove, a comfortable-looking sofa near the fireplace. Everything was clean and orderly, if a bit sparse. "This is the main room," Vincent said. "Kitchen's over here, and these are the bedrooms." He opened a door to reveal a small room with a bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a dresser, and a window with clean curtains. "This is yours. Like I said, the lock works good, and if you ever need anything, I'm right next door. Just knock." Clara stepped into the room, running her hand along the dresser. It was simple but well made, and someone, Vincent she assumed, had put a jar of wildflowers on the windowsill. The small gesture made her eyes sting. "It's perfect," she said softly. "I'm glad you think so." Vincent set her trunk at the foot of the bed. Why don't you take some time to settle in? I've got to tend the animals and then I'll fix us some supper. There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Clara sat on the bed and let out a long, shaky breath. She was married. She was in California. She was a rancher's wife. The enormity of it all crashed over her, and for a moment the fear threatened to overwhelm her completely. But then she looked around the simple, peaceful room, thought about Vincent's kind eyes and gentle manner, and felt that tiny seed of hope grow just a little bit bigger. Over the next several days, Clara began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. Vincent rose before dawn to tend the cattle and horses, and Clara would wake to the sound of him moving quietly through the house, trying not to disturb her. She'd lie in bed, heart pounding from the sudden noise, until she remembered where she was and that she was safe. Then she'd get up and start breakfast, fumbling her way through the unfamiliar kitchen until she found where everything was kept. Vincent was patient with her mistakes. When she burned the biscuits, he ate them without complaint. When she jumped at the sound of a door slamming in the wind, he simply closed it more carefully the next time. When she dropped a plate and burst into tears, certain he'd be angry, he just swept up the pieces and told her they had plenty more. "I'm sorry I'm so useless," Clara said one morning after she'd spilled flour all over the floor for the second time. "You must regret bringing me here." Vincent looked up from where he was mending a bridle. "You're not useless. You're learning. There's a difference." "But everything frightens me," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Yesterday I screamed because a chicken flew at me. A chicken, Vincent. How can I possibly be a good ranch wife when I'm terrified of livestock?" "That chicken is mean," Vincent said seriously. "She goes after me too. I've been thinking about making her into soup." Clara let out a startled laugh, then clapped her hand over her mouth, surprised by the sound. Vincent grinned at her. "There now," he said. "That's better. You've got a nice laugh. Should use it more often." As the weeks passed, Clara began to feel more comfortable in her new surroundings. The isolation that might have driven some women mad was a balm to her frayed nerves. She could go days without seeing another person besides Vincent, and it was blissful. No one to judge her, no one to mock her fears, just the quiet routine of daily work and the vast, empty landscape. She learned to collect eggs from the chickens, though she still approached the mean one with caution. She learned to make bread that actually rose, to churn butter, to tend the vegetable garden that was indeed in need of attention. Vincent taught her to recognize the calls of different birds, to tell when a storm was coming by the smell of the air, to read the tracks left by animals in the dust. And slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Clara discovered that Vincent was a morning person who became almost cheerful after his first cup of coffee, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise, that he loved to read and had a small collection of books he'd accumulated over the years, that he sang softly to himself when he was working, usually old ballads that made her chest ache with their melancholy beauty. Vincent learned that Clara needed warning before someone touched her, that she did better with routines she could predict, that she was actually quite intelligent and well-read despite her fears, that she had a gift for growing things, and under her care the garden began to flourish, that she was stubborn in her own quiet way, determined to overcome her limitations even when it terrified her. They fell into a routine that worked for both of them. Vincent would handle the heavy work of the ranch, the cattle and horses and repairs, while Clara managed the house and garden. They'd eat breakfast together, then separate for the day's work, coming together again for the evening meal. After supper, they'd sit on the porch in the cooling air, and Vincent would tell her stories about the area, about his life before she came, about the land and its history. It was during one of these quiet evenings, about 6 weeks after Clara's arrival, that everything changed. They were sitting on the porch steps watching the sun set when Clara heard the thunder of approaching hooves. She froze, her hand gripping the edge of the steps so hard her knuckles went white. "Easy," Vincent said quietly, standing up. "Probably just Henderson coming by." But it wasn't Henderson. 3 men rode into the yard, dusty and rough-looking, with guns strapped to their hips and hard eyes that raked over the property with obvious interest. Clara's breath came in short gasps, and she pressed herself against the porch post, trying to make herself invisible. "Evening," Vincent said, his voice calm but with an edge to it Clara had never heard before. "What can I do for you gentlemen?" The lead rider, a man with a scarred face and tobacco-stained teeth, grinned unpleasantly. "Heard you had yourself a wife now, Hawthorne. Thought we'd come by and offer our congratulations." "That's kind of you," Vincent said evenly. "But as you can see, we're just sitting down to supper." "So if there's nothing else, now don't be unfriendly," the scarred man said. "We rode all the way out here. Least you could do is introduce us to the lady." "I don't think so," Vincent said, and there was steel in his voice now. His hand had moved to rest on his own gun, and Clara realized with a jolt that she'd never actually seen him wear it before. He must have put it on when he heard the horses. "I think it's time for you boys to move along." The scarred man's expression darkened. "That's no way to treat neighbors, Hawthorne. You're not my neighbors. You're Randall's men, and Randall's been trying to squeeze me off this land for 2 years now. Whatever message you came to deliver, consider it delivered. Now get off my property." The tension in the air was suffocating. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only watch in frozen terror as the 3 men exchanged glances. The scarred man spat into the dirt. "Randall says he's willing to pay fair price for your land," he said. "More than fair, considering how hard it is to keep cattle alive out here." "You should think about it." "I've thought about it, and the answer's no. This land is mine, legal and proper, and I'm not selling." "That's a shame," the scarred man said. "Real shame. Pretty wife like that, seems a shame to see her made a widow so young." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt her vision starting to tunnel, black spots dancing at the edges. She was going to faint, she could feel it coming, but she couldn't let herself, not now, not when Vincent needed her to hold together. "You've got 3 seconds to turn those horses around," Vincent said quietly. "After that, I start shooting and I don't miss." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the scarred man laughed, a sound with no humor in it, and yanked his horse's reins. "We'll be back," he said, "and next time we won't be so friendly." They rode off in a cloud of dust, and the moment they were out of sight, Vincent turned to Clara. She was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering, despite the evening heat. "Come inside," he said gently, helping her to her feet. Her legs wouldn't hold her, and she would have fallen if Vincent hadn't caught her, scooping her up and carrying her into the house. He set her on the sofa and knelt in front of her, taking her ice-cold hands in his warm ones. "Breathe," he said firmly. "Clara, look at me. Breathe." She tried, but her lungs wouldn't work properly. Everything was spinning, and she could still see those hard eyes, that cruel smile, the way they'd looked at her like she was something to be used and discarded. "They're gone," Vincent said. "They can't hurt you. I won't let them hurt you." "They said they'd come back," Clara gasped out. "They said—" "I know what they said." Vincent's jaw was tight. "And I meant what I said too. I won't let anyone hurt you, Clara. I promise you that." She wanted to believe him, but the fear was like a living thing inside her, consuming everything else. "Who's Randall? Why does he want your land?" Vincent sighed and sat back on his heels. "Colton Randall owns the biggest ranch in this part of California. He's been buying up smaller properties for years, forcing people out when they won't sell. My land has the best water access in the region, and he wants it. But this ranch was my father's and his father's before that. I'm not giving it up without a fight. But if he's dangerous, he's a bully who uses fear to get what he wants, Vincent interrupted. But he's not going to run me off, and he's sure as hell not going to lay a hand on you. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I'm scared. I know you are. Vincent squeezed her hands. But listen to me. I've been dealing with Randall's threats for 2 years now, and nothing's happened yet. He knows that if he crosses the line into actual violence, the law will come down on him, and he doesn't want that. So he sends his men to intimidate and threaten, hoping I'll just give up and leave. His eyes were intense, holding hers. But I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. This is our home, Clara. We have every right to be here, and I will protect that right. I will protect you. Always. The word echoed in Clara's mind, settling over her like a blanket. Always. It was such a big promise, such an absolute one. And looking into Vincent's face, seeing the determination and sincerity there, she believed him. Always, she whispered. Always, he confirmed. That night, Clara lay in her bed, unable to sleep, her mind racing with fear and what-ifs. She heard Vincent moving around the house, checking the locks on the doors and windows, and she knew he was as unsettled as she was. Around midnight, she heard him settle onto the sofa, apparently not willing to be behind a closed door where he couldn't hear if someone approached. The next morning, Vincent was already up and dressed when Clara emerged from her room. There were dark circles under his eyes, but his expression was calm. I'm going to ride to the Hendersons' place, he said. Let them know what happened. Walter Henderson is a good man, and he'll want to be aware that Randall's men are making rounds. I'll be back before noon. The thought of being alone made Clara's stomach clench, but she nodded. Be careful. I will. Vincent hesitated, then added, There's a rifle above the door and a shotgun in my bedroom. I know you're not comfortable with guns, but I'd feel better if you at least knew where they were. Clara looked at the rifle, her heart hammering. I've never fired a gun. Hopefully you'll never need to. But if someone comes and I'm not here, you go to your room and lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Understand? Yes. After Vincent left, Clara tried to keep herself busy with her usual chores, but every sound made her jump. Every shadow sent her heart racing. She found herself checking the windows constantly, scanning the horizon for approaching riders. The isolation that had once felt safe now felt vulnerable, exposed. Vincent returned as promised, and Clara nearly wept with relief at the sight of him. He brought news that Walter Henderson had also been approached by Randall's men, as had several other small ranchers in the area. Walter thinks we should band together, Vincent said. Make it clear that we're not going to be picked off one by one. He's organizing a meeting for next week, all the independent ranchers. Will you be all right if I attend? Clara wanted to beg him not to go, not to leave her alone again, but she knew that was her fear talking. Of course, she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. The days until the meeting passed in anxious tension. Vincent taught Clara how to load the shotgun, though she could barely hold it without shaking. He showed her the best places to take cover if she needed to, the quickest routes from the house to the barn. He was trying to prepare her without frightening her more, but Clara could see the worry in his eyes. The night before the meeting, they sat on the porch as usual, but the comfortable silence had been replaced by an undercurrent of tension. Clara kept stealing glances at Vincent, noticing things she hadn't let herself notice before. The strong line of his jaw, the way his hands rested easy on his knees, the quiet strength that radiated from him. He'd kept every promise he'd made to her, had been nothing but patient and kind, and somewhere along the way her feelings had shifted from gratitude to something deeper, something that made her chest tight and her palms sweaty in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Vincent, she said quietly, and he turned to look at her. Thank you. For what? For keeping your word, for protecting me, for treating me like I matter. His expression softened. You do matter, Clara, more than I expected when I sent that advertisement. There was something in his voice, a warmth that made Clara's breath catch. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw her own feelings reflected back at her. It terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. I should turn in, she said, standing abruptly. You have an early morning. Clara, wait. Vincent stood too, and before she could move away, he reached out and gently caught her hand. She didn't pull away. I know this arrangement was meant to be practical, companionship and partnership, nothing more, but I need you to know that my feelings have changed. You've become important to me, more than just a wife in name. I care about you, about your happiness and your safety. I don't want to rush you or push you into anything you're not ready for, but I needed you to know. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. My feelings have changed too, she whispered. I'm just afraid. I know you are, but I'm not. Vincent squeezed her hand gently. I'm not afraid of what I feel for you, Clara, and whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready to make this marriage more than just an arrangement, I'll be here. She couldn't find words, so she simply nodded, and Vincent smiled at her with such tenderness it made her ache. He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, then released her. Sleep well, he said. Clara didn't sleep well at all. She lay awake thinking about Vincent's words, about the way his lips had felt against her skin, about the fact that she'd married a good man, and she was falling in love with him. And it was the most terrifying, wonderful thing that had ever happened to her. The meeting was held at the Henderson Ranch, and Vincent left at dawn to attend. Clara spent the day in a state of anxiety, unable to concentrate on any task for more than a few minutes. She kept looking toward the road, watching for Vincent's return, starting at every sound. When he finally rode in late that afternoon, Clara ran out to meet him, then stopped herself, suddenly shy. But Vincent's face broke into a grin at the sight of her, and he swung down from his horse and crossed the distance between them. I'm all right, he said. Everything went well. We've got a plan to watch each other's properties, to make sure none of us are caught alone if Randall's men come calling again. I was worried, Clara admitted. I know. I'm sorry I was gone so long. Vincent led his horse toward the barn, and Clara walked beside him. Walter's wife, Mary, sent something for you. She said she'd like to come visit sometime, if you'd be agreeable to it. The thought of a visitor still made Clara nervous, but Mary Henderson had seemed kind the one time Clara had glimpsed her in town. That would be nice, she said. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new normal. Vincent and the other ranchers took turns riding patrol, watching for Randall's men. Mary Henderson did come to visit, bringing fresh bread and a warm smile, and to Clara's surprise, she found herself actually enjoying the company. Mary was easy to talk to, didn't press when Clara was quiet, and shared news from the area in a friendly, non-threatening way. Through Mary, Clara learned that Colton Randall was indeed as ruthless as Vincent had suggested. He'd forced at least a dozen families off their land through various means, always staying just on the right side of the law. But the Independent Ranchers Alliance seemed to be working. Randall's men hadn't been back since that first night, and there was a cautious hope that maybe the show of unity had convinced him to look elsewhere. As summer faded into fall, Clara found herself changing in ways she never would have imagined. The constant work of the ranch was making her stronger, physically and mentally. She no longer jumped at every sound, though sudden noises still startled her. She could collect eggs without fear, could tend the garden without constantly looking over her shoulder, could even ride into town with Vincent without having a panic attack, and her feelings for Vincent continued to grow. She found herself looking forward to their evenings together, to the sound of his voice and his quiet laughter. She noticed when he was tired or worried, and she learned to read his moods as well as he'd learned to read hers. She caught herself watching him when he worked, admiring the easy strength with which he moved, the care he took with the animals, the way he was always gentle with her. One evening in late October, they were sitting by the fire after supper, Vincent reading aloud from one of his books, when he stopped mid-sentence and looked at her. "What is it?" Clara asked. "You're smiling," he said. Clara touched her face, surprised to find that she was. "I suppose I am." "You do that more now. Smile, laugh, you seem happier." "I am happier," Clara said softly. "Happier than I've ever been, I think." Vincent set the book aside. "Clara, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Her heart began to race, but she nodded. "Are you happy with how things are between us? With this arrangement," he gestured between them. "Because I am, but I also wonder if you might want more, if you might be ready for more." Clara's mouth went dry. She knew what he was asking, what he was offering. "I do want more," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm afraid." "Of me?" "No, never of you." Clara twisted her hands in her lap. "Of disappointing you, of not being what you need, of being too afraid to be a proper wife." Vincent moved from his chair to kneel in front of her, taking her restless hands in his steady ones. "Clara, you are exactly what I need. You're strong and brave and good, and you've made this house a home. You've made me happier than I've been in years." His thumbs stroked gentle circles on her palms. "I don't expect you to be anything other than what you are, and if you're afraid, we'll take it slow. We'll go at whatever pace you need." "What if I'm always afraid?" Clara asked, tears spilling over. "What if I never get better?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Vincent said firmly. "But Clara, listen to me. You've already gotten so much better. When you first arrived, you couldn't even look me in the eye. Now you're running this ranch alongside me, you're making friends, you're building a life. You're one of the bravest people I know. I don't feel brave. Brave people are usually scared. That's what makes them brave, doing things even when they're afraid." Vincent reached up and gently wiped away her tears. "I love you, Clara. I've loved you for weeks now, maybe longer. And I will wait as long as you need me to wait." Clara's heart felt like it might burst. "I love you too," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've been so afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or too presumptuous, but I love you, Vincent. I love you so much." Vincent's face transformed with joy, and he pulled her down from the chair and into his arms. Clara went willingly, burying her face in his shoulder and breathing in the familiar scent of him, soap and leather and sun-warmed skin. He held her close but not too tight, his hand stroking her hair, and Clara felt safe in a way she'd never experienced before. When she pulled back to look at him, Vincent cupped her face in his hands and searched her eyes. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Clara breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and warm and perfect. The kiss was sweet and unhurried, a promise of things to come, and when they finally parted, Clara was smiling through her tears. They sat together on the floor in front of the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked until the logs burned down to coals. They talked about their hopes and fears, their pasts and their futures, all the things they'd been too careful to say before. And when Vincent finally carried Clara to his bedroom, she went without hesitation, ready to make their marriage real in every sense. Vincent kept his promise to go slow, to be gentle, to let Clara set the pace. He kissed away her tears and her fears, whispered reassurances and words of love, and showed her with his hands and his body that she was cherished, treasured, wanted. And Clara, who had spent so many years afraid of everything, found the courage to let herself be vulnerable, to give herself completely to the man she loved. Afterward, lying in Vincent's arms with her head on his chest, Listening to the steady beat of his heart, Clara felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, would probably always be there to some degree, but it no longer controlled her. She had found something stronger, a love that gave her strength and a man who made her believe she was capable of anything. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Vincent's voice was drowsy and content. "For keeping your promise, for protecting me always." His arms tightened around her. "Always," he murmured. "That's a promise I'll keep every day for the rest of my life." Winter came to San Bernardino County, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain that turned the dusty landscape green. Clara learned to manage the household through the changing seasons, preserving vegetables from the garden, making candles and soap, mending clothes by lamplight. Vincent taught her to ride properly, and she began accompanying him on short trips around the ranch, checking on the cattle and the fences. The alliance of ranchers continued to hold strong, and there were no more visits from Randall's men. Rumor had it that Randall had turned his attention to properties further north, and the small ranchers breathed a collective sigh of relief. Vincent remained cautious, but the tension that had marked those first months gradually eased. Mary Henderson became a regular visitor, and Clara found herself actually looking forward to the friendship. Mary taught her to quilt and shared recipes, and in return, Clara shared cuttings from her garden and herbal remedies she'd learned from books. Through Mary, Clara was gradually introduced to other women in the area, and while socializing still made her nervous, she found she could manage it in small doses. One February morning, Clara woke feeling queasy and exhausted. Vincent noticed immediately, his brow furrowing with concern. "You feeling all right?" he asked, pressing his hand to her forehead to check for fever. "Just tired," Clara said, though the smell of coffee brewing was making her stomach turn in an unpleasant way. "I'll be fine." But she wasn't fine. The nausea continued for several days, always worst in the morning, and Clara began to suspect what was happening. When she confided in Mary during one of her visits, the older woman smiled knowingly. "Sounds like you're expecting," Mary said. "Congratulations." Clara's hand went to her still flat stomach, wonder and fear mixing in equal measure. A baby. She and Vincent were going to have a baby. The thought was terrifying and amazing all at once. That evening, she told Vincent. He'd just come in from checking on a cow that looked ready to calf, and Clara met him at the door, unable to wait any longer. "I need to tell you something," she said, and the words came tumbling out. "I think I'm pregnant. I'm almost certain of it. I know we didn't plan for this so soon, and I'm scared because what if I'm not a good mother? What if I pass my fears on to the baby? What if—" Vincent cut off her spiral of anxiety by pulling her into his arms and kissing her soundly. When he pulled back, his eyes were shining. "We're having a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "I think so, yes. Clara, that's wonderful. That's the best news I could have hoped for." He held her face in his hands, his expression serious. "You're going to be a wonderful mother. And whatever fears you have, we'll face them together, just like we face everything else." Clara burst into tears, overwhelmed by emotion, and Vincent just held her, rocking her gently until the storm passed. The pregnancy was difficult at first. Clara's nausea lasted well into her 4th month, and she was exhausted all the time. Vincent took over more of the household chores, bringing her tea and dry toast in the mornings, rubbing her aching back in the evenings. He treated her like she was made of glass, which would have annoyed her if it wasn't so sweet. As winter turned to spring, and Clara's belly began to swell with their child, Vincent began making preparations. He built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. He rode into town and came back with soft flannel for diapers and tiny gowns. He read every book on childbirth he could find, determined to be prepared for anything. Clara watched him prepare with a mixture of love and amusement. "You know Mary has agreed to attend the birth," she said one evening, watching him oil the cradle for the third time. "She's delivered dozens of babies. We'll be fine." "I know," Vincent said, but he continued his preparations anyway, and Clara understood. He'd lost his first wife and child in childbirth. Of course he was anxious. She went to him and took the rag from his hand, setting it aside. "Vincent, look at me." He met her eyes reluctantly. "I'm not Sarah," Clara said gently. "And this baby isn't that baby. What happened before was tragic, but it doesn't mean it will happen again." "I can't lose you," Vincent said, his voice rough with emotion. "Clara, I can't." "You won't," she promised, even though she knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out here far from doctors and hospitals. But she refused to let fear dictate their lives. "We're going to be fine, all three of us." Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle began calving, the garden burst into bloom, and the creek ran high with snowmelt from the distant mountains. Clara's belly grew round and heavy, and she felt the baby move inside her, little flutters that gradually became kicks and rolls. Vincent would press his hand to her stomach in the evenings, his face full of wonder when he felt the baby move. In early June, on a hot afternoon when the air shimmered with heat, Clara felt the first contraction. She'd been hanging laundry, and the pain caught her by surprise, making her gasp and clutch at the clothesline. By the time Vincent found her, the contractions were coming regularly, and there was no doubt that the baby was coming. Vincent tried to hide his panic, but Clara could see it in his eyes as he helped her into the house. He sent one of the ranch hands racing to fetch Mary Henderson while he got Clara settled in bed. His hands shook as he brought her water, and Clara reached out to catch them. "I need you to be strong for me," she said. "Can you do that?" Vincent took a deep breath and nodded. "I can do that." Mary arrived within the hour, calm and capable as always. She shooed Vincent out of the room over his protests and took charge of the situation. Clara labored through the afternoon and into the evening, and it was every bit as hard as she'd feared. The pain was overwhelming and she was terrified, but Mary talked her through each contraction, and Vincent stayed just outside the door, close enough that Clara could hear his voice when she called for him. Finally, just as the sun was setting, Clara felt an overwhelming urge to push. Mary encouraged her, and Clara bore down with every ounce of strength she had left. One push, two, three, and then suddenly the pressure was gone and there was a thin, angry wail filling the room. "It's a boy," Mary announced, and Clara burst into tears of relief and joy. Mary cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Clara's arms. He was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and a red, scrunched-up face. Clara stared at him in wonder, unable to believe that this little person was hers. "Vincent!" She called, and the door burst open immediately. Vincent rushed in, his face pale and his eyes wild, but when he saw Clara holding the baby, his expression transformed. "He's here," Clara said, her voice choked with emotion. "Our son is here." Vincent knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face, and reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around Vincent's, and Vincent made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He's perfect," Vincent whispered. "You're perfect. Thank you, Clara, thank you." They named him Thomas Vincent Hawthorne, after Vincent's father, and he was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. Vincent was a devoted father from the first moment, taking to fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. He would pace the floor with Thomas for hours when the baby was fussy, would change diapers without complaint, would sit and watch his son sleep with an expression of such pure love it made Clara's heart ache. Clara, for her part, was surprised by her own capability. She'd been so afraid of being a bad mother, but her instincts were strong. She knew when Thomas was hungry, when he needed changing, when he just wanted to be held. Yes, sometimes his cries startled her, and yes, the responsibility of keeping another human alive was terrifying, but she managed. More than managed, she thrived. The summer passed in a haze of sleepless nights and baby smiles, of learning to navigate this new phase of their life. Vincent hired an additional ranch hand to help with the work so he could spend more time with his family. Mary Henderson came by regularly, bringing gifts and advice, and other women from the area stopped by to meet the baby and offer their congratulations. In August, a year after Clara had first arrived in San Bernardino, she stood on the porch with Thomas in her arms, watching Vincent work with the horses in the corral. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, and for a moment Clara felt a flutter of the old fear. But then Thomas made a cooing sound and Vincent looked up and waved at them, grinning, and the fear dissolved like morning mist. "You're safe," Clara whispered to her son. "You're loved, and you're going to grow up brave and strong because your father is the best man I know." As if he'd heard, Vincent finished with the horse and headed toward the house. He climbed the porch steps and kissed Clara soundly, then pressed a kiss to Thomas's forehead. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arm around Clara's waist. "About how much has changed in a year," Clara said. "About how I came here so afraid I could barely function, and now I'm standing here with a baby in my arms and a husband I love and a home that's truly mine." "You did all that," Vincent said. "You were brave enough to take a chance on a stranger, brave enough to let yourself heal, brave enough to love." "We did it together," Clara corrected. "You kept your promise, Vincent. You protected me and you helped me learn to protect myself." "Always," Vincent said, and he kissed her again, slower this time, full of promise and love. The years that followed were not without their challenges. The ranch had good years and bad years, seasons of plenty and seasons of drought. There were illnesses and injuries, setbacks and disappointments. But through it all, Clara and Vincent faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. They had 3 more children, 2 girls and another boy, and the house that had once seemed too quiet was filled with laughter and noise and life. Clara learned to manage the chaos without letting her anxiety overwhelm her, though there were still hard days when the fear threatened to take over. On those days, Vincent would hold her and remind her of how far she'd come, and Clara would gather her strength and keep going. Colton Randall eventually lost most of his empire through a combination of bad investments and legal troubles, and the threat he'd once posed faded into memory. The small ranchers' alliance dissolved naturally as the need for it passed, but the friendships remained. The Hawthorns and the Hendersons stayed close, and their children grew up together, running wild across the California landscape. Vincent's hair began to gray at the temples, and Clara found laugh lines forming around her eyes. They were getting older, but the love between them never diminished. If anything, it grew richer and more complex, layered with shared history and mutual understanding. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Clara back to the San Bernardino hotel where they'd first met. It had been renovated since then, made fancier, but the private parlor where they'd had their first meal together was still there. They sat in almost the same spot, and Vincent reached across the table to take her hand, just as he had all those years ago. "I want you to know something," he said. "Every day I spent with you has been a gift. Every challenge we faced together. Every joy we experienced together. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Hawthorne, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "I love you," she said. "I loved you then, I love you now, and I'll love you always." "Always," Vincent agreed, and he smiled at her with the same warmth that had made her feel safe all those years ago. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Their children were waiting for them, grown now but still gathered at home for this special occasion. Thomas, 20 years old and looking more like his father every day, had prepared a feast. The girls, Emma and Catherine, had decorated the house with wildflowers. And young Robert, 16 and full of energy, had made a cake that was slightly lopsided but made with love. They ate together, laughing and talking, sharing stories and memories. Clara looked around the table at her family, at the life she and Vincent had built together, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She'd come to California expecting nothing more than survival, and she'd found everything. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Clara and Vincent sat on the porch as they had countless times before. The air was cool and sweet, full of the scent of sage and wildflowers. Vincent had his arm around Clara's shoulders and she leaned into him, perfectly content. "You ever think about that day you arrived?" Vincent asked. "How frightened you were." "Sometimes," Clara admitted. "It seems like a different life now, like that was a different person. But I remember how it felt, how every little thing seemed like a threat, and I remember you promising to protect me always. I meant it. I know you did, and you kept that promise every single day." Clara turned to look at him. "But the best thing you did was teach me to protect myself. You showed me I was stronger than I believed, braver than I knew. You gave me the space to heal and the support to grow. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." Vincent's eyes were soft in the darkness. "You gave me just as much. After Sarah died, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone. I didn't think I deserved happiness again. But you came into my life and reminded me that second chances exist, that love can come around again if you're open to it. You gave me a family, Clara. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Out in the distance, an owl hooted, and somewhere closer a coyote called. The sounds that had once terrified Clara now felt like home. Thomas appeared at the door. "Mother, Father, I'm heading out early tomorrow to check the north pasture. Just wanted to say good night." "Good night, son," Vincent said, and Clara added her own good night. Thomas disappeared back inside, and they could hear him talking to his siblings, their voices a pleasant murmur in the background. "He's so much like you," Clara said. "Steady and strong and kind." "He's got your courage," Vincent countered. "All our children do." "I hope so," Clara said. "I hope we've taught them that fear isn't weakness, that being afraid and doing things anyway is the definition of bravery. I hope they know they're loved unconditionally, that they can always come home no matter what." "They know," Vincent assured her. "You've made sure of that." As they sat there together, the years seemed to fall away, and Clara could remember with perfect clarity that first evening on this porch, when 3 men had ridden into the yard with threats, and she'd been paralyzed with fear. She could remember Vincent's promise, his steady voice saying he would protect her always. And he had, but more than that, he'd helped her learn to protect herself and to build a life that was worth protecting. The morning of their 25th anniversary arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Their children had planned a celebration, and neighbors and friends began arriving in the early afternoon. The yard filled with people and laughter, with music and dancing, with food and fellowship. Clara moved through the crowd, greeting guests, and marveled at how far she'd come. She could talk to strangers now without her heart racing, could handle the noise and chaos of a party without feeling overwhelmed. She still had moments of anxiety, times when the old fears surfaced, but they no longer controlled her life. Mary Henderson found her near the garden. Mary's hair was completely gray now, and she moved a bit slower than she used to, but her smile was as warm as ever. "Look at you," Mary said, taking Clara's hands. "I remember when you first came to this area, so frightened you could barely speak. And now look, you're the heart of this community. Everyone respects you, Clara. You've built something real here." "I had help," Clara said, glancing over at Vincent, who was teaching a group of children some kind of game that involved a lot of shouting and running. "We all need help," Mary agreed. "The trick is being brave enough to accept it." "You did that, and it made all the difference." As the afternoon wore on, Vincent pulled Clara away from the party and led her to the barn. She went willingly, curious about what he was up to. Inside the barn, away from the noise and bustle, he pulled her into his arms. "I have something for you," he said, and produced a small wooden box. Clara opened it to find a locket on a delicate gold chain. When she opened the locket, she found a tiny photograph of their family on one side and an engraving on the other that read, "Always." "Vincent," she breathed, tears filling her eyes. "It's beautiful." He took the locket from her and fastened it around her neck. "I wanted you to have something that would remind you of what we've built together, of the promises we've kept and the love that's sustained us." Clara touched the locket, feeling the weight of it against her chest. "I don't need a reminder," she said. "I see it every day in your eyes, in our children's faces, in the home we've made, but I'll treasure this always." "Always," Vincent echoed, and he kissed her with all the passion and tenderness of 25 years of marriage. They returned to the party hand in hand, and the celebration continued late into the evening. When the last guest finally departed and the children had cleaned up and gone to bed, Clara and Vincent found themselves alone on the porch once more. 25 years, Clara said wonderingly. "It seems like a lifetime and no time at all." "The best 25 years of my life," Vincent said. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Clara said something she'd been thinking about for a while. "Do you remember what you said that first night when Randall's men came?" "I said a lot of things that night. You said you'd protect me always. And you have, Vincent. You've kept that promise every single day in ways big and small, but I want you to know something." She turned to face him fully. "I'll protect you too. Always. I'm not that frightened girl anymore. I'm strong now, strong enough to stand by your side and face whatever comes. Strong enough to protect what's ours, to fight for our family and our home. You gave me that strength, and I'll use it to keep you safe, just as you've kept me safe." Vincent's eyes gleamed with emotion. "We protect each other," he said. "That's what makes us strong, Clara. Not me alone, not you alone, but us together." "Together," Clara agreed, and she sealed the promise with a kiss. The years continued to pass, bringing changes as they always did. The children grew up and started families of their own, but they never strayed far. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations, working alongside his father with the same dedication and care. The girls married good men who treated them with respect and love, and young Robert eventually opened a store in San Bernardino, though he visited the ranch regularly. Clara became a grandmother, then a great-grandmother, and each new baby was a miracle that filled her with wonder. She and Vincent grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts still sharp. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands as they watched the sunset, still found comfort and joy in each other's presence. On the morning of their 50th wedding anniversary, Clara woke to find Vincent already up, sitting in the chair by the window and watching her with a soft smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. Good morning, my love. Vincent came to sit on the edge of the bed. 50 years ago today, I stood in that church and promised to love you for the rest of my life. It's a promise I've been grateful to keep every single day. Clara reached for his hand, noting how her own had become wrinkled and spotted with age, but Vincent's grip was still strong, still steady. "We've had a good life," she said. "The best life," Vincent agreed. Their family gathered that afternoon, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. There were 4 generations of Hawthorns present, all of them connected by the love that Clara and Vincent had built together. They cut a cake, shared stories, posed for photographs that would eventually line the walls of the house. As the sun began to set, Clara found herself standing on the porch alone for a moment, looking out over the land that had become so dear to her. The ranch had changed over the years, expanded and modernized in some ways, but the heart of it remained the same. This was home, this place where she'd learned to be brave, where she'd found love and purpose and peace. Vincent joined her, slipping his arm around her waist in the familiar gesture that still made her heart flutter. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different my life could have been," Clara said, "if I hadn't answered that advertisement, if I hadn't had the courage to come west, if I hadn't met you." "I think about that sometimes too," Vincent admitted. "About how empty my life was before you came, how lonely." "We saved each other," Clara said. "You gave me the courage to heal and I gave you a reason to hope again." "We gave each other everything," Vincent said, and he pulled her close. They stood like that as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, as the stars began to emerge and the night creatures started their songs. And Clara, who had once been afraid of her own shadow, felt nothing but contentment and love, surrounded by the life she and Vincent had built together through courage and commitment and unwavering devotion. "I love you," she whispered into the gathering darkness. "I love you too," Vincent replied. "Always, always," Clara echoed, and the word was a promise, a prayer, and a celebration all at once. The months that followed their 50th anniversary were peaceful ones. Vincent's health remained good, though he moved more slowly than he once had. Clara's hands sometimes ached with arthritis, but she could still tend her garden, still bake bread, still do the things that brought her joy. They spent their days in quiet companionship, needing few words to communicate after so many years together. On a cool morning in late autumn, Clara woke to find Vincent still sleeping beside her, which was unusual. He was always an early riser. She reached over to wake him and found his hand cool to the touch, his chest still. And she knew, with a certainty that stole her breath away, that he was gone. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to pull her under. Vincent, her partner, her protector, her love, was gone. The man who had promised to protect her, always, had kept that promise to his very last breath, had stayed with her through 53 years of marriage, had given her everything he had to give. The family gathered for the funeral, and the church in San Bernardino was packed with people whose lives Vincent had touched. Clara sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and listened to stories about her husband's kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength. And through the grief, she felt a profound gratitude that she'd had him in her life at all. After the funeral, Thomas approached her with concern in his eyes. "Mother, you shouldn't be alone out at the ranch. Come stay with Sarah and me for a while." But Clara shook her head. "Thank you, son, but no. That ranch is my home. It's where your father and I built our life together, and I'm not ready to leave it." "But Mother, I know you're worried," Clara said gently, "but I'm stronger than you think. Your father taught me that." She returned to the ranch alone, and the silence of it was deafening. Everywhere she looked, she saw Vincent's presence. His hat hanging by the door, his chair at the table, his worn boots on the porch. The grief would hit her in waves, stealing her breath and bringing her to her knees. But each time, she would remember what Vincent had told her all those years ago. Brave people are usually scared, but they do things anyway. So Clara did things anyway. She got up each morning and made breakfast, even though there was no one to share it with. She tended the garden, collected the eggs, managed the household. Thomas and the ranch hands handled the cattle and the heavy work, but Clara maintained her routines, finding comfort in their familiarity. Mary Henderson came to visit regularly, bringing food and company. "How are you managing?" she asked one afternoon as they sat on the porch. "Some days are harder than others," Clara admitted, "but I'm managing. Vincent wouldn't want me to give up, to let the fear take over again, so I keep going." "He'd be proud of you," Mary said. "I hope so," Clara replied. As the months passed, Clara found her own way through the grief. She discovered that she could remember Vincent with love and gratitude rather than just pain. She could look at their photographs and smile at the memories rather than just cry for what was lost. She could sit on the porch in the evenings and feel his presence beside her, a comforting ghost that reminded her she was never truly alone. She lived for 5 more years after Vincent's death, years that were quieter but still full of meaning. She watched her great-grandchildren grow, passed on her knowledge of herbs and gardening, told stories about the old days when California was still wild and anything seemed possible. She never remarried, never even considered it. Vincent had been her great love, and that was enough for a lifetime. On a warm spring morning, just after her 77th birthday, Clara woke feeling at peace. She rose and made her coffee, tended her garden, collected the eggs from the chickens that still scratched in the yard. In the afternoon, she sat on the porch with her knitting, enjoying the sunshine and the sound of birds singing in the trees. Thomas found her there later, sitting in her chair with her knitting in her lap and a smile on her face. She had passed quietly, peacefully, and Thomas liked to think that his father had come to collect her, that somewhere beyond this life they were together again. They buried Clara next to Vincent in the small cemetery outside San Bernardino. The entire family attended, and once again the church was packed with people who had been touched by her courage and kindness. Her children spoke about her strength, about how she had overcome her fears to build a life of love and purpose. They spoke about the example she had set, about the legacy she had left behind. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations, and the story of Vincent and Clara became part of the family lore. The mail-order bride who had been afraid of her own shadow, and the lonely cowboy who had promised to protect her always, and the great love they had built together, despite all obstacles. It was a story told to each new generation, a reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it, that love is a choice made every day, and that the promises we keep define who we are. The house still stands today, weathered but strong, a testament to the life that was built there. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun is setting and the wind whispers through the sage, those who live there swear they can hear 2 voices on the porch, speaking words of love and devotion, keeping promises that not even death could break. Always.